Hi, my name is Sheila. Welcome. We are back together to talk about the problems associated with our youth and social media together.
Yeah.
Now, this is part two. If you missed part one, go back and check it out because it is the intro to the lawsuit. It's the one where they say, oh, let me put my glasses on because I want to make sure I get this right. It's the one where they say social media is exploiting the vulnerable brains of our youth. So that is the Seattle Public School District number one, and it's lawsuit against YouTube and Facebook slash Meta and TikTok slash ByteDance and some other parties that I didn't necessarily know of. In this one, we're going to talk about the factual allegations. So if you go back through one, you'll get sort of this overview of the lawsuit. And now we're going to jump into the factual allegations about this whole thing because they're starting with the problematic users part, and I think they also said excessive. But let's go ahead and take a look at that so that you aren't just sitting here looking at me talk about it. All right, so this is the factual allegations. This is actually what we're going to be talking about. Now, this is a 92-page lawsuit. I got to break these things up because there's just so much information in here. But I do want to scroll back just to the first part for just a second, just to bring you up to speed if you missed part one, so you don't feel like you're coming in and you have no idea what's going on. Seattle School District number one is suing. You can see the defendants listed there: Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Snap, TikTok, Google, YouTube, your usual suspects there when we talk about big tech and social media. They have the introduction there that talks about defendants' growth is a product of choices they made to design and operate their platforms in a way that exploit the psychology and neurophysiology of their users into spending more and more time on these platforms. And it says defendants have intentionally cultivated creating a mental health crisis among America's youth. And number two, there is, what they're really saying here is defendants have done so for profit. Defendants are their business model. And if you caught the part one, then you heard me talk a little bit about how this almost feels like the tobacco lawsuit back in the day, and how the tobacco companies needed to keep this pipeline going of new users because the old users would get addicted and eventually die off. So they needed this pipeline. Well, they sort of say the same thing here, not because of the same endpoint, but because you have this situation where they want new users and get them addicted and have them using their platform. But here are the defendants, and as I just said before, it's all the usual suspects: Meta, Facebook Holdings, Facebook Operations, Facebook Technologies, Siculus. I had never heard of them, but apparently it constructs the data facilities for Meta slash Facebook. And you have Snap, TikTok, and further down, when I get to a separate video, I'm going to be talking about what each one of these platforms is doing individually, because that's part of the allegation too. It's not just all of them together have this impact. No, this lawsuit is actually going in and saying, hey, wait, let's stop and talk about TikTok. TikTok. Okay, excuse me, TikTok. I didn't mean that. Okay, it's TikTok. So let's go in and talk about TikTok. Let's go in and talk about Instagram. Let's go in and talk about Facebook. And so they're going in individually and talking about what each one of these platforms is doing in order to exploit youth and then cause this resulting harm to their brains. Now, the whole problematic users, I want to see where they're going with that, how they really explain that piece. But let's go ahead and jump into the factual allegations here. And there are actually 4 sections under factual allegations. I'm not sure how many pages this is. It's just a few pages we're going to go through in this particular video. Like I said, breaking up this 92-page complaint, because this is a lot. We want to make sure we understand what's going on here. Millions of youth, this is first one. Millions of youth have become excessive and problematic users of social media. It says, starting with paragraph 35, researchers studying the effect of social media. And let me just double check and make sure I've got this up here right. Okay, great. Researchers studying the effect social media has on the brain have shown that social media exploits the same neural circuitry as gambling and recreational drugs to keep consumers using their products as much as possible. How many times do you find yourself just scrolling through and you look up and it's an hour later, right? As described below, each defendant designed and marketed their exploitive social media platform to be extremely popular with youth, and they have been successful. 90% of children ages 13 to 17 use social media. Younger children also regularly use social media. One study reported 38% of children ages 8 through 12 used social media in 2021. Other studies reveal numbers as high as 49% of children ages 10 to 12 use social media, and 32% of children ages 7 to 9 use social media. The most popular of these platforms is YouTube. A vast majority, 95% of children ages 13 to 17 have used YouTube. TikTok has skyrocketed in popularity with teenagers since its merger with Musical.ly in 2018. As of July 2020, TikTok classified more than a third of its 49 million daily users in the United States as being 14 years old or younger. And that likely underestimates those under 14 and older teenagers, those between 15 and 18, because TikTok claims not to know how old a third of its daily users are. TikTok is now the second most popular social media platform, with over 67% of children ages 13 to 17 having used the app. Let me stop right here for just a second, because I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. But Sheila, it's the parents. Where are all of these parents? You're now telling us these large percentages of teenagers and even younger, um, at the young end of that, are using these social media platforms. And it said the largest percent were going to YouTube. Where are the parents? I know that's what you're thinking. Where are the parents? I can't answer that for you. I'm just the parent of my child, and my child is 21. But no, seriously, if you think back to it, we just live in a different society right now, and we can't really compare 2022 to 2002. It is a different world. The way we operate is different. And I'm going to give you an example. My daughter was at a music camp when she was in high school, or maybe junior high, something like that. And, part of the camp experience is you don't have your cell phones, and you aren't, on your cell phones. You're doing the music camp. Well, they were making their own original music, and they wanted to look up some things. And each of them they weren't supposed to have their cell phone, she said, but each of them started using their cell phone to find things out on YouTube, to just use Google. And she was telling me later that had they not had their phones, it would have been much harder for them to do it. So as much as we sometimes poo-poo social media and the reliance now on cell phones and all of these apps, there are practical and educational and informative uses that teenagers can have. Okay. So there are some good things that sort of provide a democracy to some extent, because it evens out the playing field to some extent, so that more people have access to it. Now, I understand not everybody does, but when you think about things that kids can now have access to, they might not be able to afford, having a tutor come to their house, or they go to their house, or whatever. Now they can go online and find something for free. So there are good things that relate to this. However, there are some concerns. So no, parents are not necessarily on top of their kids all day long keeping up with this. I can tell you that it's really hard. These apps, they're like that, I don't know, thousands that come up every day. You can't keep up with them, but you can have some control over what your kids are doing. especially at the younger end of this, where you're talking about 13, 14, 15. Okay. But yeah, a little bit older, it's harder. Okay. So let me go back to, I think I'm actually on paragraph 39 here, because you guys would rather like see this than listen to me, right? Instagram's numbers are comparable to TikTok, with 62% of children ages 13 to 17 reporting they have used the app. Snapchat also remains popular with youth, with 59% of children ages 13 to 17 reporting they have used the app. Facebook rounds out the five most popular social media platforms, with 32% of children ages 13 to 17 reporting they have used Facebook's app or website. Teenagers who use these social media platforms are also likely to use them every day. One study estimates that 62% of children ages 13 to 18 use social media every day. An increasing number of younger children also use social media daily, with 18% of children ages 8 to 12 reporting using a social media site at least once a day, which makes me want to look down here at 17 to see where they got those statistics from. But yeah, obviously from another complaint there. But this really young age, sometimes this is also parents, putting their kids in front of YouTube and letting them watch some of the children oriented YouTube channels, because there are those. And then it says daily use for many teenagers does not consist of logging onto a platform just once. Rather, many teenage users check social media repeatedly throughout the day. In one study, teenage users reported checking Snapchat 30 times a day on average. Even more alarming, some teenagers never stop looking at social media. Okay, so they've got this infographic up here from Pew Research Center, and it's breaking it down. So let's take a look at this here. So we've got YouTube here at the top. And you've got almost constantly. Remember, YouTube's got this recommended list that it will push to you based on what you have looked at before and what other people like you like too. Okay. So, they've got their algorithms, and that's why it's easy for you to fall into this cycle of watching more of it, because they keep delivering to you more of what you want. It's like if you want candy and somebody shows up at your house every day delivering candy, and then they tweak their formula and realize you like a certain kind of candy. So then the next day they show up with that kind of candy, and then they find out something else to tweak. So you get more and more of what it is that you want. So almost constantly, 19 several times a day, YouTube. Yeah. So YouTube is really up there. I think where you see less use, here's where you see less use, which is to be expected, because the understanding or the thinking is that Facebook has an older set of users, people my age, I guess, and so when you look at this, almost constantly, very few teenagers are constantly using Facebook. I don't know that my daughter, she might have a Facebook account. I've never heard her say anything about Facebook. Okay, so they are just really not using that. And then if you take a look at Instagram here, and she has told me too that she hardly ever uses Instagram anymore. She primarily is on Snapchat or TikTok. Okay, so that's where she's over here in this thing here several times a day probably, but she is not down here on Facebook, and she is on YouTube a little also. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so nearly 20% of teens use YouTube almost constantly. TikTok and Snapchat are close behind, with near constant use rates among teens at 16% and 15% respectively. Meanwhile, 10% of teens use Instagram almost constantly, and 2% of teens report using Facebook almost constantly. See how that went down? Okay, so 20% YouTube, then you had a little bit lower TikTok and Snapchat, and then way, way, way down when you get to Facebook. 2% of teens report using Facebook almost constantly. It's for us. Facebook is for, hey, it started with us. So, yeah. Teenagers are aware of the grip social media has on their lives, yet still cannot stop using it. 32% of teenagers admit they spend too much time on social media, and over half of teens say that giving up social media would be somewhat hard, with nearly 1 in 5 teens saying giving up social media would be very hard. And of the subgroup of teenagers who use at least one platform almost constantly, 71% said giving up social media would be hard, with 32% saying giving up social media would be very hard. The more that teenagers use social media, the harder they find it to give up. Teenagers who say they spend too much time on social media are almost twice as likely to say that giving up social media would be hard as teenagers who see their social media usage as about right. Yeah. Another study shows that among teenagers who regularly use social media, 32% wouldn't want to live without YouTube. That should have been my title on this video. I don't want to live without YouTube. 20% of teenagers said the same about Snapchat, 13% said the same about both TikTok and Instagram, and 6% said the same about Facebook. Again, we see this same hierarchy with YouTube at the top, Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok sort of fighting for the middle. And then Facebook is going to be the one that's having the least amount of impact in terms when it comes to youth and teenagers. Despite using social media frequently, most youth do not enjoy it. Only 27% of boys and 42% of girls ages 8 to 18 reported enjoying social media a lot in 2021. All right, so that wraps up the first. So one thing we can walk away is we understand now what the hierarchy is. And that really they don't want to be without it. They like it and they're going to have a hard time giving it up. All right, so let's go into point number 2. Research has confirmed the harmful effects of social media on youth. Well, there we are. We're going back to that problematic language, right? Paragraph 50. Social media use, especially excessive use, has severe and wide-ranging effects on youth mental health. Social media use is linked to increases in mental, emotional, developmental, and behavioral disorders. Independent research and internal data from these social media platforms show social media has a direct negative impact on teenagers' mental health on various fronts. In general, electronic screen use causes lower psychological well-being. This link is especially apparent among adolescents. Those with high screen time are twice as likely to receive diagnoses of depression, anxiety, or need treatment for mental or behavior health conditions compared to low screen time users. You guys, that's that comparison thing. I get up there and I see somebody else. I'm thinking like, well, why not me? I must not measure up, all of those things. Paragraph 52, social media specifically has a detrimental effect on the psychological health of its users. One systematic review of 16 studies on the effects of social media on mental health found social media use increases levels of anxiety and depression. Social media also has detrimental effects on the mental health of adolescents specifically. Increased social media use increases depressive symptoms, suicide related outcomes, and suicide rates among adolescents. So let me stop here for a second because here's something I'm not hearing so far. I'm an attorney, I'm looking for nuance, right? And there is not any so far. And I'm sorry, my eyes just tear up all the time. I have such allergy issues. I'm looking for nuance here. And so far, it doesn't look like they've shared any nuance. In other words, what they're saying is social media, bad, bad, bad. Okay. But I don't know how many of you have seen these channels. And I'm just gonna talk about YouTube. I'm not gonna talk about some of these other ones because I think this applies less to the others. But on YouTube, there are channels that are set up to provide relaxing and calm environments. There are some where you can turn them on and you are just listening to the rain pour. And they may have a black screen or they may have just a screen of landscape. Okay. There are some that are set up that just have affirmations, just positive thinking, positive affirmations. You are beautiful, you are loved, you are great, you are, and they help lift the spirit and help build the self-esteem. And so, I get where they're going with this lawsuit. They have a point to make, but right now, it's a very generalized statement, and it is not allowing for the nuanced conversation that really specifically targets what's the content on YouTube and TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram that's harmful, because it's not all of it. So what is it that we need to pinpoint that's a problem? And I think that is what we need to focus on when we dig down into this. So I get what they're saying. I get where they're coming from. But right now, they're just naming the whole platforms and just really generalizing. I think in the end, it's going to be really helpful. And there are probably studies out there that talk about this, that really dive down deep into it and say, here are the kinds of types of content that we really think cause issues for youth. Here are the types of content that we think are beneficial. Okay. And there, if there's this kind of research over here, there's likely this kind of research over here too. So again, the complaint is the complaint, but there's probably a little bit more to it than that. So, okay, let's get back into this. One of the primary reasons the use of social media is associated with depressive symptoms among adolescents is because it encourages unhealthy social comparison and feedback seeking behavior. So, what did I say? If that is the content, so that's the content, that's the issue. Okay. And so now we're making this distinction that I was just talking about. It's not this content, it's this content over here. The problem is that the platforms have set up this situation to give you more of this, more of the stuff you shouldn't have. That's the issue. All right, because adolescents spend a majority of their time on social media looking at other users' profiles and photos, they are likely to engage in negative comparisons with their peers. Specifically, adolescents are likely to engage in harmful upward comparisons with others they perceive to be more popular. It used to be you just compared yourself to the popular person in your high school, but now you can compare yourself to the popular people all across the whole world. It could make you feel a certain kind of way. Clinicians have also observed a clear relationship between youth social media use and disordered eating behavior. The more social media accounts an adolescent has, the greater disordered eating behaviors they exhibit. Additionally, research shows the more time young girls spend on social media platforms such as Instagram and Snapchat, the more likely they are to develop disordered eating behaviors. Okay, because we're comparing ourselves and we forget it. So it used to be we just look at the magazines, right? And even then, we have to be reminded those pictures are photoshopped, and there are actually a couple of really good content creators. One is on Instagram and the other is on YouTube. And the one that's on Instagram, she really goes through and breaks down what she sees as problematic photography so that people can understand that's not the way that person normally looks. Okay. Here's the before, here's the after, here's the original, here's the fake. Okay. But look at me. I'm someone who's much older. I get that. Young people are probably not seeing that. Okay. So they're making these comparisons thinking that they're comparing themselves to something that's real, and they aren't. They're comparing themselves to something that is fake or to something that cannot be a standard that you have in real life. Paragraph 56. Social media has also caused an increase in cyberbullying. The more time an individual, especially males, spend on social media, the more likely they are to commit acts of cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is now so common that most American teens, 59%, have experienced some form of cyberbullying. This number includes 42% of teens experiencing name calling, 32% being subject to false rumors, 25% receiving an unsolicited explicit image, 21% being subject to online stalking, 16% receiving physical threats online, and 7% having had explicit images of them shared without their consent. Now, there have been some laws that have been put in place in some states regarding cyberbullying, where they actually have a specific law that speaks to this. but everybody hasn't gotten on board with this yet. And so here's the thing. The problem is people feel like they can hide on social media. There's this anonymity. And so they're less likely to to keep inside things that normally, normally they might press pause and say, maybe I don't want to send that, maybe I don't want to say that. But social media has emboldened some people. And additionally, they see what adults are doing. I'm sorry, let's just be clear. We live in a world that has become more divisive, and they see people who in the past were a little bit more upstanding, a little bit more civil in their discourse and disagreement when it comes to policy and issues, that now, the gloves are off and they say and do just about anything. That has creeped down to our youth. They are watching us and they are now imitating our behavior. And so if you're putting bad examples out there as adults, what do you think they're going to be modeling? So, as parents, as guidance counselors, teachers, ministers, organizational leaders, it puts more work on us to try to combat that, because we now have to up our level of showing that's not the role model. Okay, that's not the role model. But it's so much easier to hide behind some avatar and some fake account that you made on Gmail. And so that's what people are doing. And then they get out there and they cyberbully other people. And these teens are now getting the brunt of this. Social media use also contributes to sleep deprivation. Young adults who spend a lot of time on social media during the day or check it frequently throughout the week are more likely to suffer sleep disturbances than their peers who use social media infrequently. In turn, disturbed and insufficient sleep is associated with poor health outcomes. Defendants exacerbate the disruption of sleep by sending push notifications and emails either at night when children should be sleeping or during school hours when they should be studying, thereby prompting children to re-engage with defendants' platforms at times when using them is harmful to their health and well-being. Okay, so I have my phone on, even though I do get some notifications. I have my do not disturb that comes on at a certain time at night and then goes off at a certain time in the morning. Yeah. Again, recognizing that when we're talking about children, there is a level of parental responsibility that is required here. Okay. 59. Further, children are especially vulnerable to developing harmful behaviors because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, which is why we need parents and which is why we need these social media platforms not to be doing what they're doing. Consequently, they find it particularly difficult to exercise the self control required to regulate their own use of defendants' platforms. Even adults have issues. Let's just stop there. Okay, that's just my comment. Even adults have issues. So we cannot expect children who are still growing to have the kind of self control that's needed for these platforms. In this regard, self regulation allows people to delay gratification, postponing an immediate reward for a better reward later. Adolescents' low capacity for self-regulation means they are particularly vulnerable to the immediately pleasurable but ultimately harmful effects of the repeated dopamine spikes caused by an external stimulus such as likes that activate the reward system in the brain. And that's footnote 48 for those of you who want to see the data on that one. As discussed in further detail, these reward-based learning systems contribute to the maintenance of excessive use patterns. Researchers investigating the directionality between social media platforms and problematic use have found that increases in the intensity of use predict problematic use. And empirical studies have found that problematic use is associated with insomnia, stress, relationship dissatisfaction, anxiety, social anxiety, and depressive symptoms. In this regard, adolescents are especially vulnerable to long-term harm from defendants' platforms because excessive and problematic use can disrupt their brains' development at a critical stage. All right, so that's two. Okay, we're continuing to talk about this problematic use. And wow, Okay. C, as a result, America's youth are facing a mental health crisis. Now, we've talked about what they've been doing. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the consequence of that. The number of youths using defendants' social media platforms and the intensity of their use has increased significantly since 2008, which has contributed to a wide range of negative effects on youth mental health. Over that same time, the number of youths experiencing depression, contemplating suicide, seeking emergency room help for mental health issues, and tragically committing suicide has skyrocketed. Today, 1 in 5 children ages 3 through 17 in the United States have a mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral disorder. On December 7th, 2021, these issues led the United States Surgeon General to issue an advisory on youth the mental health crisis. In issuing the advisory, the Surgeon General noted mental health challenges in children, adolescents, and young adults are real and widespread. Even before the pandemic, an alarming number of young people struggled with feelings of helplessness, depression, and thoughts of suicide, and rates have increased over the past decade. While the report highlights ways in which the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated mental health issues for American youth, it also highlights the mental health challenges youth faced before the pandemic. Specifically, the report notes that before the pandemic, mental health challenges were the leading cause of disability and poor life outcomes in young people. Before the pandemic, 1 in 5 children ages 3 through 17 in the United States had a mental, emotional, developmental, or behavioral disorder. From 2009 to 2019, the rate of high school students who reported persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, increased by 40%. And that is to 1 out of every 3 kids. The share of kids seriously considering attempting suicide increased by 36%, and the share creating a suicide plan increased by 44%. From 2007 to 2019, suicide rates among youth ages 10 to 24 in the United States increased by 57%. By 2018, suicide was the second leading cause of death for youth ages 10 to 24. From 2007 to 2016, emergency room visits for youth ages 5 to 17 rose 117% for anxiety disorders, 44% for mood disorders, and 40% for attention disorders. This and other data led the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and the Children's Hospital Association to join the Surgeon General and declare a national emergency in child and adolescent mental health. President Biden also addressed the mental health harms defendants' platforms have caused youth in his State of Union address this year. There, he noted that children were struggling from the harms of social media even before the pandemic and called on all to hold the social media platforms accountable for the national experiment they're conducting on our children for profit. Okay, there's another lead right there. All right, and here is the last section. So now we've seen the outcomes, okay? So this is a lot to take in. Some of those ages are really young. This is really difficult to hear. All right, paragraph 72. This is the last section. This mental health crisis is no accident. It is the result of defendants' deliberate choices and affirmative actions to design and market their social media platforms to attract youth. Defendants each run and operate social media platforms. The interactive features defendants provide on their platforms are similar in many respects. For example, Facebook, Instagram, Snap, TikTok, and YouTube all offer tailored feeds of content curated by complex algorithms intended to learn your interests. Ways to publicly express affirmation for such curated content through likes, comments, and sharing of reposting the content. And in fact, each is known to copy the designs and features of one another. The salient features of defendants' social media platforms are described in more detail below. Defendants make money from their social media platforms by using them as advertising platforms. Defendants collect data on their users' viewing habits and behaviors and use that data to sell advertisers access to their youth and other users to allow those companies to promote their products. Advertisers pay a premium to target advertisement to specific categories of users, including youth. Defendants view youth, adolescent, and even pre adolescent users as one of their most valuable commodities as an audience for their advertisements. Young users are central to defendants' business model and advertising revenue, as children are more likely than adults to use social media. Indeed, 95% of children ages 13 to 17 have cell phones, 90% use social media, and 28% buy products and services through social media. To profit from these young users, defendants intentionally market their platforms to youth and adolescents. For children under 13, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPA, regulates the conditions under which platforms like defendants can collect and use their information. COPA requires platforms that either target children under age 13 or have actual knowledge of users under age 13 to obtain verifiable parental consent prior to collecting and using information about children under age 13. Defendants have blatantly violated COPA or turned a blind eye to younger users on their platforms by leaving users to self-report their age. More recently, defenders embarked on a bolder strategy and sought to capture pre-adolescent audiences by offering kid versions of their platforms that, while not collecting and using their information, are reportedly designed to fuel kids' interest in the grown-up version. To maximize revenue, defendants have intentionally designed and operated their platforms to maximize users' screen time. Defendants have done so by building features and operating their platforms in a manner intended to exploit human psychology using complex algorithms driven by advanced artificial intelligence and machine learning systems. In this regard, defendants have progressively modified their platforms in ways that promote excessive and problematic use and have done so in ways known to be harmful to children. Okay, so I have to stop there because I have to share what came to me as I'm reading this whole thing. I got to take a sip first, though. Okay, if you are my age or maybe a little bit younger, you may recall something called television, where the major channels were ABC, NBC, and CBS. And then later on along came cable and along came, I forgot what we used to call like HBO and Showtime, but we had a name for them. It was cable, but it was something else. You remember on Saturday mornings where they played cartoon after cartoon after cartoon. And in between the cartoons, they showed you all kinds of sugared cereal and toys and, advertising totally directed toward kids. So this thing that they're talking about here is television now put on your phone, where the advertisers are doing the very same thing they were doing before. This is not anything new. It's just on a different platform, and they have taken it to a whole nother level in order to get their target audience and keep them forever. Okay. I remember sitting at home, in our den, we called it in our den, where we had the TV on, where we would get up early and just watch hours of cartoons. And you'd see all the stuff on the commercials that you wanted. Okay. Now, thankfully, my mom was just like, no, I'm not buying sugared cereal. Again, the parents stepping in, right? But nowadays, it's on their phone. Like you can't even necessarily see what your child is looking at unless you're right there. When you had the TV in the family room, everybody could see what the children were watching. Okay. Everybody could see what they were being sold when the commercials came on. And so even though it's the same sort of idea, what they're saying here is they have taken that and they have managed to perfect this to such an extent that you are now so much more hooked than you were before. I would love to see some sort of research that compares the two, because it's the same thing, but it's just sort of on steroids, you know? Cartoons and cartoon advertising directing at I mean, it was directed at us. Okay, my parents weren't sitting down there watching cartoon after. I mean, we had I had my favorites and everything, and so now it's just switched. It's no longer on your TV as much. I don't even know if Saturday morning cartoons still come on. Okay, maybe somebody who has a kid can tell me, but I think the switch went from maybe Saturday morning cartoons to things like what is it, like Nickelodeon. I mean, that's what my daughter watched. It was Nickelodeon, Barney, all of that sort of stuff. So it's just sort of changed, but the way that it's being delivered to us is a lot more harmful now because of the way that this is being set up. So that's what the argument is here about this. But I had to stop because it just reminded me of sitting in front of the TV on Saturday and just watching cartoon after cartoon after cartoon until my mom got up and she was like, "You have to get your chores done." And then we would at least switch to doing chores on the commercials. So we would get up during the commercials, and that's when we would do our chores. All right. So as I just said, to maximize revenue, defendants have intentionally designed and operated their platforms to maximize users' screen time. So it's not just about watching that one cartoon show. It's about, it being, think about personalized cartoons delivered to you back then. You'd never get up. It would just be Saturday, it'd be Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. That is the difference. Defendants have done so by building features and operating their platforms in a manner designed to exploit human psychology using complex algorithms. Okay, so we've mentioned that the artificial intelligence and machine learning systems. So back in the day, they looked at like Nielsen ratings and things. Okay, but now they've got all this AI, this data learning that just lets them know. And so as a result, it says defendants have progressively modified their platforms in ways that promote excessive and problematic use. Okay, so let's move on. Paragraph 79. One way defendants maximize the time users spend on their platforms involves the design of feeds, whether of photos, videos, or sponsored or promoted content. Each uses algorithms to serve users personalized content. What did I just say when I was talking about those cartoons? If I could have had personalized cartoons, to serve users personalized content for them to consume ad nauseum. Google's former design ethicist, Tristan Harris, explained that this never-ending stream is designed to keep users scrolling and purposely eliminate any reason for them to pause, reconsider, or leave. That's that point in time where you're sitting there scrolling through the feed and you just keep going, you keep going, you keep going. An hour later, you're like, oh my God, I cannot believe I just wasted an hour on this. People are wasting their lives. They're like, their lives are just gone because of social media, and it is hard to get off. And so we can't sit back and just blame people and say you don't have enough self-control. They have perfected delivering this system to you. Okay, it's just like what they called cigarettes. When I talked about this in the intro video, that was a nicotine delivery system. Okay, so it's sort of the same sort of thing. It's like this dopamine and response system, this reward system is what they're talking about. And it's just feeding into you. And part of it is outside of your control because there is a physiological response is going on inside. This is not me, Dr. Sheila, because I'm not a doctor. This is them saying this. Defendants' feeds take an experience that was bounded and finite, and turn it into a bottomless flow that keeps going. Because there used to be a time where, it sort of ended, but now they've got this continuous thing. This flow state, as psychologists describe it, fully immerses users, distorts their perception of time, and has been shown to be associated with problematic use of social networking sites. A second way social media platforms manipulate users is through social reciprocity. Reciprocity, from a psychological perspective, refers to the powerful social phenomenon of how people respond to positive or conversely hostile actions. Reciprocity means that in response to friendly actions, people respond in a friendly manner and vice versa. Philip Kuntz best illustrated the automatic nature of reciprocity through his Christmas card experiment. In the experiment, he sent a group of complete strangers holiday cards with pictures of his family and included a brief note. Those people whom he had never met or communicated with before reciprocated, flooding him with holiday cards. The majority of the responses didn't even ask Mr. Kuntz who he was. They simply responded to his initial gesture with a reciprocal action. Reciprocity is why Facebook and Snapchat automatically tell a sender when you saw their message instead of letting you avoid disclosing whether you read it. As a consequence, you feel more obligated to respond immediately. It happens to me all the time. It'll be like so and so commented on your post. So then I feel like I got to go up there and say thank you or respond back. Yeah, that's totally me. That keeps users on the platform or through push notifications. Another insidious tool, they call it insidious, users feel psychologically compelled to return to the platform. Yes, I do. If somebody responds to something I posted, I feel like it's rude if I don't respond. But think about it. If they weren't sending me the notification, then at some point in time, I would go up there myself and then maybe respond to a whole bunch and get back off. But no, what happens is you get the notification and then you go and respond. And then as a result, you see other things that are up there and you respond to other things. And then you start looking at the feed. And the next thing you know, an hour has gone by. A third way defendants manipulate users to keep using or coming back to their platforms is through the use of intermittent variable rewards. Okay. And sorry. Slot machines are a frequent example of how IVR works. Users pull a lever to win a prize. With each pull, the user may or may not win a prize, an intermittent reward that varies in value. IVR works by spacing out dopamine triggering stimuli with dopamine gaps, allowing for anticipation and craving to develop, which strengthens the desire to engage in the activity with each release of dopamine. Defendants bake IVR into the design and operations of their respective platforms by linking a user's actions, like pulling a lever, with a variable reward. For example, when we swipe down our finger to scroll the Instagram feed, we're playing a slot machine to see what photo comes next. Meta also delays the time it takes to load the feed. This is because without that 3-second delay, Instagram wouldn't feel variable. Without that delay, there would be no time for users' anticipation to build. In slot machine terms, there would be no sense of, will I win? Because you'd know instantly. So the delay isn't the app loading, it's the cogs spinning on the slot machine. Each of the defendant's platforms exploits this biochemical reaction among its users, typically using likes, hearts, or other forms of approval that serve as the reward. Everyone innately responds to social approval, but some demographics, in particular teenagers, are more vulnerable to it than others. Youth are especially vulnerable both to the ways in which defendants manipulate users to maximize their watch time and to the resulting harms. Children's brains undergo a fundamental shift around age 10 that makes preteens extra sensitive to attention and admiration from others. Consequently, defendants' use of IVR, reciprocity, and other rewards to maximize the time users spend on their platforms exploits a vulnerability unique to youth. This extra sensitivity also puts them at greater risk. In adolescence, the structures of the brain closely tied to social media activity and that drive instinctual behavior begin to change. The ventral striatum is one of those structures. I'm going to have a science lesson here now before it's all over, and a medical one too. All right, so here we go. Let's get into the dopamine and oxytocin. Okay, the ventral striatum is one of those structures. It receives a rush of dopamine and oxytocin, known as the happy hormones, whenever we experience social rewards. Between the ages of 10 and 12, the receptors for these happy hormones begin to multiply in this region of the brain, which makes compliments on a new hairstyle, laughter from a classmate, or other social rewards start to feel a lot more satisfying. Historically, These biological changes incentivized kids and teens to develop healthy social skills and connections. But arriving at school in a new pair of designer jeans, hoping your crush will smile at you in the hallway, is worlds away from posting a video on TikTok that may get thousands of likes and views, according to Mitch Preinstein, Chief Science Officer for the American Psychology Association. Part of what makes the interaction so different is that they are often permanent and public in nature. There is no public ledger tracking the number of consecutive days you have spoken to someone like there is for snap streaks. Similarly, after you walk away from a regular conversation, you don't know if the other person liked it or if anyone else liked it. Conversely, on defendants' platforms, kids, their friends, and even complete strangers can publicly deliver or withhold social rewards in the forms of likes, comments, views, and follows. These social rewards release dopamine and oxytocin in the brains of youth and adults alike, but there are two key differences, Officer Preinstein explained. First, adults tend to have a fixed sense of self that relies less on feedback from peers. Second, adults have a more mature prefrontal cortex, an area that can help regulate emotional responses to social rewards. Adolescents, by contrast, are in a period of personal and social identity formation, much of which is now reliant on social media. Due to their limited capacity for self regulation and their vulnerability to peer pressure, adolescents are at greater risk of developing mental disorder. Together, Meta, Snap, TikTok, and Google have designed, refined, marketed, and operated their social media platforms to maximize the number of youths who use their platforms and the time they spend on these platforms. Despite knowing that social media inflicts harm on youth, defendants have continued to create more sophisticated versions of their platforms with features designed to keep users engaged and maximize the amount of time they spend using social media. Defendants' conduct in designing and marketing exploitive and manipulative platforms, youth spend excessive amounts of time on defendants' platforms. Defendants' efforts worked. The majority of teenagers use the same 5 social media platforms: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook. Each of these platforms individually boasts high numbers of teenage users. Okay, so that's that was a lot. Okay, so they sort of wrapped that up really well. You know, we got to see, the percentage of youth, the ages that it ranged from, to hear some of those ages that start at 3 and then to go up to 17 and 18. And then to read about, how this impacts them biologically, the prefrontal cortex, the self-development, and then the delivery of dopamine and oxytocin there at the end. So that's it. That's part 2, where we have gone over this sort of problematic use of social media as it relates to the defendants developing these platforms and marketing, delivering, and just making sure that they've got these youth in this pipeline. If you learned a whole lot more, and that was a lot, don't forget to like the video, because see, this is exactly what they're talking about. Okay, like the video, subscribe to the channel. So when you like the video, okay, yes, it's an indication for you. And one of the things they tell us as people who post content is, oh, always remind people to like, that helps, because sometimes they don't remember. And then what they're saying in this is, though, oh, but when I open it up and see that I've got more likes, then I feel better, and I do. I feel like I've created a quality product. I feel like it's something people are interested in. It's something that I had fun creating, and I'm getting validated that I did a good job. And so there's a reason why those likes have a biological impact on me and other content creators too. And then when I say subscribe, so there are 2 pieces to this. One is you subscribing, the other is and I guess they still have the notification bell. I don't know. It used to be they had a notification bell so that then you could get notified every time the person you subscribed to posted or shared something. I don't know if they still have that. But again, that is a signal, that's you signing up for it though. Do you know what I mean? That's you saying, yes, please notify me every time this person posts a new video. So this is exactly what they're talking about here. My videos though are not directed to kids. I don't know that any kids or youth would be interested in me going through and talking about and breaking down lawsuits. But if you got something out of this and you want to hear more, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you are worried about social media impacts on your children, make sure you reach out to a healthcare provider who can work with you on that. All right, peace.